Geopolitics and Empire is joined by Gideon Joubert, who hails from South Africa. He's got a fascinating background. He'll tell us all about it. Welcome to GNE, Gideon.
Thank you so much for having me, Javier. I really appreciate the invitation. I've checked out your website and your other streams, and it's really high quality stuff that the sort of interviews that I'd myself like to do with other people, but I don't have the talent or the technical skills to pull them off. So thank you so much for having me. And look, it's going to be a great talk, I think.
Yeah, maybe I'll get you into trouble. I recently interviewed the Dutch politician Thierry Baudet, and that went viral. It was featured on national Dutch media. They were using it to attack him because he talked about reptiles and Vladimir Putin. But I somehow stumbled across your Twitter account recently because, as I was saying, I follow a lot of these military security folks who follow you, NC Scouts, Joe Dolio, who have been my guests on TNT Radio. And I love your analysis. I think we see eye to eye on a lot of things. And I couldn't find too much in terms of your bio, but could you tell us a bit about yourself and the work you do?
Okay, I'll give you the whole thing. So I used to be an airline pilot. I was flying jets for a living for about 14 years, since 2008. Then lockdown happened, and that kind of ended my career completely, for want of a better word. But I've always been since 2013, 2014, been involved in the firearm rights debate in South Africa. I really hate calling it gun rights because guns are inanimate objects. They don't have rights. However, people do. So maybe the correct description would be personal safety rights, or rather self-defense rights debate. I've written about the topic since then. I've done interviews, podcasts, and then I took it to the next level, and I became an actual firearm instructor, starting with the basics and then working my way up to getting to the advanced level firearms instruction, which in South Africa, we don't have as strong a gun culture as America. Advanced level for us is definitely not what they would consider to be advanced level on the United States. So I've been involved with that. I've also started work as a private security consultant, working for myself and working for other firms around here. So I do professional security consulting. And I have a very, very extensive interest, or rather extreme interest, if we could call it that, in personal safety, in personal security, as well as commercial security, as well as the national in South Africa now safety and security situation. And of course, how that is impacted by global events, because there's a lot that can be spoken about transnational organized crime and how it impacts us locally. But yeah, that's the big picture overview of who I am and where I come from.
A message from our sponsors. It seems we may be headed for the 1930s all over again. Financial collapse, tyranny, and world war. I've already secured multiple passports, offshore accounts, safe havens, and escaped to the sunnier shores of Mexico. My friend Mikkel Thorup of the Expat Money Show is hosting the Expat Money Summit with 30-plus experts that'll help you reclaim freedom in this fourth turning by moving your life and wealth offshore. Protect yourself and secure a new life abroad. Register now for free at expatmoneysummit.com, or don't, and enjoy surviving on insect protein while stuck in the metaverse. Since 2020, Ron Unz of Unz.com has argued the COVID outbreak was due to a U.S. biowarfare attack against China and Iran. Jeffrey Sachs, the Russian Ministry of Defense, and others are now making similar suggestions. Weeks before COVID appeared in Wuhan, a top U.S. biowarfare official ran the Crimson Contagion exercise on how to protect America against infection if a dangerous virus suddenly appeared in China. After COVID appeared in Wuhan, it jumped to Iran, infecting Iranian leadership only weeks after America had assassinated Iran's military commander. Iran publicly accused America of an illegal biowarfare attack and filed a complaint with the UN. Ron Unz has produced a free ebook and is available for interviews to further discuss this issue. And don't forget to fund Geopolitics and Empire. You can leave a donation, except on Patreon or PayPal, which have banned us, book a consultation, or become a member.
Fascinating stuff, and security. That's a big theme for me as well. And maybe to start globally and then get to South Africa, because I did want to get your thoughts on. My general view is that things have been predictably heading south for decades now, and I think we're approaching this predictable end game or transition phase, whatever you want to call it, where Western empire is both seemingly declining and striving for greater global domination, leading to economic collapse. We see it everywhere in so many countries. Decline here in Mexico and South Africa, Asia, all over the place. Social unrest, increased totalitarianism just across the board. I know you've mentioned it in South Africa. I see you've got a live interview you're going to be giving in a couple of days to talk about that. And potential World War III with Russia and China. I actually saw a clip today from 1997, Russian TV, talking about 1997, where they saw war games where the U.S. had been wargaming war with Russia and China in 2025, using Ukraine as an excuse, which is this is pretty crazy. So what's your take on the global situation?
The global situation is a complete mess, and I think you're 100% correct in saying this has been a long time coming, and it's almost been. I'm loath to use the word engineered, because I don't think the people responsible for it are that intelligent. I think they've just been absolutely committed to very bad policy, which we can actually morally refer to as evil policy that's led us down this path. I mean, someone like Milton Friedman has been warning us for probably close on to 5 decades, well, before his death, about what this fiat currency system was going to get our monetary systems domestically and globally, the sort of danger that it poses if it's mismanaged or abused. I mean, since the end of the Bretton Woods system, and I think it was 1975, there was no gold or asset link to any currency, not even the world reserve currency that is the US dollar. It's all been free floating since. And in a very short period of time, we've inflated and eroded value away. And people think inflation is just a thing that items become more expensive. It's actually a method of theft and taxation, where your savings lose their value over time because the government is printing money that it's then using for its own projects or social projects or whatever it needs to do in order to expand its influence, power, and prestige. So it's not very intelligent. It's a very simple thing, and this is where we are today. It's the same thing with the global war on terror. It's been a complete failure. But ever since 9/11, we've had more surveillance, more erosion of freedoms. I mean, the Patriot Act is still in action or still in force. Barack Obama had an opportunity, I think, in 2011 to not renew some of its sunset clauses. He renewed every single one of those, I think, except 2. And I'm pretty sure last year the remainder of them were renewed again. I missed the memo on that, but I'll take a look. But we're living in this weird sort of postmodern era where we talk about liberalism, freedom, human rights, basic human rights, and the sort of like and happiness indices, but we are less free. The erosion is continuing, and as you rightly mentioned, we're sitting probably closer to a global nuclear war than we have been since the Cuban Missile Crisis. So fun times, really.
I just say, grab the popcorn, your favorite drink, and enjoy the show. I mean, what else are you going to do? I'm not going to sit here crying about it, all depressed. We have to maintain, positivity, being happy in light of. This is, there's nothing new under the sun. So these are historical cycles, and maybe then to jump to South Africa. I'm in Mexico, where things definitely are not good. I hear things are very bad in South Africa. It might be worse than Mexico. I'm not sure. But I've had friends tell me they were planning to leave the tyrannical European states for South Africa. And then after doing more due diligence, they said, you know what, forget about it. We're going to look somewhere else. What's the situation like in South Africa overall?
So the situation in South Africa is interesting. It's probably the most interesting it's been in 3 to 4 decades. So from a social and security, a safety and security perspective, things have eroded extensively, especially since 2011. We've had a homicide rate that's increased every single year for the past 11 to 12 years. And it's increased markedly. We probably have one of the highest rates of rape and sexual violence in the world. We have a kidnapping rate that's increasing rapidly. It's still fairly low, but I mean, there was 100% increase in it in the first quarter 2022 compared to the first quarter 2021. So we have these violent crimes, much of them drug related. We have extensive sort of gangs running drugs and the turf wars are violent, as well as their competition for the market, that are integrated into a much more complex sort of organized crime ecosystem that I'll rather unpack a bit later. I just want to give you the big picture of it. And it's very complex, and it's a whole industry on its own. Then we've got corrupt politicians that are sort of eroding the security services or capturing them for their own use, as opposed to actually utilizing them to fight crime, for example. And this economic collapse that we as a country is experiencing at the moment, as well as we have the highest unemployment rate in the world at the moment, and it's still increasing. There's no sign of even slowing down or tapering. Our currency is devaluing at a steady rate against other currencies in the world at present. We are sitting with numerous economic, social, and political problems, and it's all going to manifest in something by the 2024 general election, where it's entirely possible that the current governing party, the African National Congress, also known as the ANC, that's been in power since 1994, is not going to get enough votes to actually form a government, nor are any of their traditional allies going to have enough votes to form a coalition government. So we're going to end up either with an opposition government becoming the governing party, or we're going to sit in a situation like the Israeli Knesset regularly has, or the Belgians had mercifully for a long time, which is where you can form no government, which in my opinion would be a wonderful thing, because it means these horrible people cannot force through any of their terrible ideas because they're gridlocked, which would give all of us a great relief. Then there's, of course, talk of various provinces seceding from the Republic of South Africa, which is an amazing topic on its own. So there's a lot going on here. And in spite of all the horrible things, I'm for the first time in a long time relatively optimistic about where it might go. Unfortunately, July last year, we had something called the July 2021 riots. It lasted for about a week. The most destructive riots and looting in the country since 1994, and possibly in its history. So there's a very good chance we're going to see a repeat of that event within the next 6 months. Possibly slightly longer than that, but definitely within the next year. So there's a great many concerns, but we'll unpack these things, I'm sure, individually.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. For the first time in 20 plus, almost 30 years, you might actually see a change, right? As you said, from the ANC, which I would agree, whether it's gridlock or opposition, I mean, that's a positive, no?
It definitely is a positive, but it's also something that I keep trying to remind people of, is you cannot trust the political class to keep their promises. It's been the case now for eternity, and that the solution really lies with civil society, pertaining to creating parallel infrastructure and institutions in order to live your life, do business, be profitable, be productive, be happy, and be safe, where you do not rely on state infrastructure to support you or actually fulfill any of these roles and these needs. And there's been an awakening in South Africa where there is a very active and proactive civil society of various organizations from various cultural groups working independently from each other, trying to create these systems to achieve exactly that. So whether or not we have a gridlock government, whether or not we have a government that tries to turn the ship around, ultimately, I think no one's going to bet the farm, so to speak, on positive change there. It would just be great to have the current bunch of thieves out of power, because that's literally what they are. They rob the country and the fiscus completely empty and broken. That's why we are where we are. I didn't even talk to you about the electricity crisis, but that's also something that we have at the moment, is perpetual rolling blackouts.
Yeah, I wanted to get to that a little bit later, but you mentioned the organized crime, and I saw you retweet from someone who said South Africa may soon be one of the kidnapping hotspots in the world, and once again, women and children are left to fend for themselves as political leadership has destroyed the integrity of the South African police service. And I'm here in Jalisco, the state of Jalisco in Mexico, and it was recently reported that 200 plus cops, policemen, authorities have had cases open against them for kidnapping people, citizens. Us. We had Ayotzinapa some years ago. 43 university students were renditioned and killed. It was the federal police who took these university students and basically gave them to cartels to exterminate. And, just when COVID came, I've sort of had enough with these, and I'm speaking as a Mexican. So legally, you can't call me anything. I'm a Mexican. These goody two shoes Mexicans, and who use like the quote from Romans 13 from the Bible, which says submit to the authorities. But like, wait a minute, the authorities are literally killing us. COVID came along. Public health measures, put on your masks, listen to the government. Wait a minute, they're literally killing us. We got hundreds of cops kidnapping your children, killing you. You think they care for your public health? It's like snap out of it. And so just your thoughts on the organized crime element, because our government basically is the cartel, whether it's like, as you said, South Africa or Mexico or elsewhere. So if you want to just talk about this underbelly, this mafia state or transnational crime.
Well, so there's two parts to it. So let me just quickly talk to you about our police service, which is completely broken. So in 2018, the previous commissioner of police that was fired, because this is how we get rid of police commissioners in South Africa. They're either dismissed for corruption or they're fired for incompetence, or it's never the right person for the job because it's always a political appointment. He admitted to Parliament in 2018 that the National Crime Prevention Strategy had collapsed, his words. Now, the National Crime Prevention Strategy was a policing strategy that has been in place since 1998 that was specifically engineered to address all sorts of community policing related issues and the overall criminal picture in South Africa. So the fact that thing had collapsed in the space of 2 decades was already quite alarming. Then the next thing he said is that the South African Police Service's constitutional mandate is impossible to fulfill. And the constitutional mandate is very simple. It is that the police service has the responsibility and the task and the duty to secure the citizens of the Republic and their property against crime and violence. So what he essentially directly said is that it's impossible for the police to maintain a national safety and security situation at all. Things have not improved. I think about 4 or 5 years of running budget cuts, totaling close to 50% of the total police budget, were announced also in 2018. And those budget cuts end in 2023, which means our crime rates have spiraled out of control. And to illustrate how bad it is, our conviction rate for murder is 15%. Our conviction rate for rape is less than 9%. And our conviction rate for we call it the category trio crimes. That is robbery at residential premises, robbery at commercial premises, and vehicle hijacking is less than 3%. So crime is very cheap in South Africa. It's almost, if you think about your chance of going to prison for rape, or rather not going to prison for rape, is 91%. And your chance of getting away with murder is 85%. So it's fairly easy to be a violent criminal here. Then the police themselves, I think last stat I had was 2018. There were like 9,000 and something criminal complaints against police officers. And bear in mind, only a fraction of police corruption, criminality actually gets reported, because people, for the most part, believe nothing's going to get done, or they're intimidated out of reporting it. So it's probably way more than just 9,000. But to illustrate, we're looking at 270 for that year, for 2018. It was 271 deaths in police custody, 715 deaths as a result of police action, and there were 159 cases of rape by police officials reported, as well as 6,000 cases of torture and assault. And you look at these statistics and you go, these are the people who are supposed to be maintaining law and order in South Africa. And for the most part, they're no better than common criminals themselves. And in fact, we have many non-government organizations that actually do proper research into this. And the one, which is the South African Institute of Race Relations, has said that the South African Police Service has become an entity that is infiltrated and captured by criminals, as opposed to infiltrating the criminal organizations themselves. That's how how bad the reversal has gotten. That was already from a few years ago. When we talk about organized crime, we have gangs. Cape Town is especially renowned for them, and they're quite violent, and their primary industry is drugs, crystal meth for the most part, And they've been engaged now, I think, for the past 2 years in an increasingly violent turf war. They're incredibly well armed because between 2007 and I think 2014, but this racket is ongoing, the police stole firearms that were handed into police custody by their lawful owners during firearm amnesties. And one colonel by himself sold 9,000 of these guns to the gangs. This is carrying on to the extent where fully automatic military grade stuff is regularly caught, or gangsters are found to have them. We have cash and transit gangs that have formed into cartels that are equally well armed. We have something called the taxi mafia, where are long distance and city taxi organizations engage in turf wars and intimidation and racketeering, as well as something called the construction mafia, where property developers are approached for protection money by so-called community forums, who are really just gangsters trying to muscle in on them and then getting paid off. So all of these guys actually, and then we have got the illegal miners that have got belt-fed machine guns and all sorts of stuff, and all of them actually trade amongst each others. The illegal miners, known as the Zamazamas, act as hitmen and enforcers, and they also run their own protection rackets. And then you've got the cigarette smugglers, because we smuggle cigarettes in South Africa because our taxation on them is so high that we've created a flourishing black market for contraband untaxed cigarettes. So, wonderful market mechanisms we have. The taxi mafia have their hitmen that they do work for other criminal organizations, and they all sort of work together in this network that's heavily politically connected. Our Minister of Police, Bheki Cele, for example, is close personal friends with people called the Gicaba brothers, and they are some of the most violent taxi mafiosi that own one of the biggest taxi mafia organizations in KZN, which is our easternmost coastal province. These guys are politically connected there. The gangs in the Western Cape are also politically connected to senior policemen and high-level government officials. So there was an author, I think it was a guy called Peter Louis Mayberg. He wrote a book called Gangster State or Mafia State to describe these political connections with the organized crime. And that's exactly what we are, is we're a state that's run by gangsters, both official and unofficial. And that's without wanting to, because we can talk about this for hours. That is the best overall summary I can give you. But if you've got questions, please ask.
No, I think you outlined it well. And I think these principles can be carried over to any other country. I mean, you mentioned taxi mafia. I mean, here in Mexico, how many times have I read stories where it seemed like, taxis here were acting in collusion with cartels, whether it's assassinating people, renditioning people, stealing from their own passengers, and so forth. And I think these are key principles we can just replicate to other parts of the world. I mean, even the United States, but it's just much more refined, I guess, mafia states, United States, white collar sort of crimes. And the electricity thing, this sort of collapse situation, we might find ourselves in. The Great Reset, Klaus Schwab, they talk about cyber pandemics and rationing energy, like this sort of dystopian future, and we're starting to get a taste of it in different parts of the world. I was in Croatia; the electricity there was going out for a while. Here in Mexico, like it seems to be with increasing frequency. And I saw clips from your Twitter, about long periods in South Africa without electricity. I don't know, internet. There was a recent news story you tweeted about food now crisis in parts of South Africa, or people going without food. What's sort of the situation when it comes to these things?
So the electricity crisis is a long time coming. So we've got a state monopoly on the commercial provision of electricity, and it's done by an organization called Eskom, which is the Electricity Supply Corporation of South Africa. The state-owned entity, I think it was started about 1923, and then obviously inherited in 1994 by the new democratic dispensation. And they then proceeded to mismanage this thing into the ground by literally building insufficient new infrastructure to actually keep the industries running. So we've had a manufacturing sector collapse, I think, starting about 2011. And in spite of that, it hasn't been a sufficient decline in large-scale economic activity for us to keep the lights on with our existing power generation infrastructure. So we run mostly on coal, electricity in South Africa, so coal-burning power plants. Lots of them are very old and still insufficient, and we're getting an incredible number of breakdowns. And the reason we're getting breakdowns is because there's a mafia inside Eskom that is sabotaging it for political reasons or for commercial gain, economic gain. And the current management structure of Eskom has been entirely incapable of getting control of that. So we're sitting with what we call now stage 3 rolling blackouts, which is, I think, you don't have electricity for about, let me count quickly, about 9 hours of the day in various phases. I'm off grid, but most people aren't off grid. So they just kind of have to push through this. We went up to stage 6 for more than a week about a month ago, which meant you had about electricity less than 12 hours a day, which means doing business is almost impossible. So we have this, we're teetering on the edge of a grid collapse, and have for probably more than a year had that problem. And now our president at COP27 is going to tell the wonderful globalist European Union partners about our plans to shut down 10 of our coal power plants in order to comply with the emission targets and this green economy that they want to build. Except for the inconvenient part that we have nothing with which to replace these coal power plants we're shutting down. So to call it dystopian is 100% correct. It's like there is a 100% committed push to just destroying people and their lives and their livelihoods and their ability to manufacture anything or be remotely independent from state slavery. And then we have the food crisis, which is now a worldwide thing. So we have a food security problem in one of our provinces called the Eastern Cape. There were reports already out of 2020 about kids there like eating wild plants just to survive because they don't have money to buy food, which is more of an economic problem. We still have more than large-scale enough commercial farming in South Africa, but because of the price of our fuel going up as well as our refining capacity that has collapsed, we only have one operating fuel refinery left. Which is a third of what it used to be, meaning we're almost entirely dependent on, and love your mug, by the way.
For people's Mises, right? And the Fed, yeah.
So we're almost entirely dependent on fuel imports, which are incredibly expensive. Fuel being one of the most important productive inputs in the economy. Everything we do, from planting to harvesting to transporting things, all of this stuff runs on the price of fuel. So we are experiencing extraordinary food price inflation. Hungry people are angry people, and we have a lot of angry people in South Africa with a high unemployment rate and low productivity rate, which is also why our number of violent protests or riots over the past decade have increased by 300%. And we now have more than 10 a day of them. So, yeah, these things are unfortunately all connected.
It looks like a zombie movie going forward. I mean, I even fear this scenario for Mexico, just this overall trend as things just become dilapidated, fall apart, infrastructure, as you mentioned, electricity and whatnot, food crisis, especially in urban areas. You're going to see more homeless people, more people carrying out crime, getting desperate, and it's gonna be like a zombie movie. You mentioned off grid. I mean, I'm interested. What does that mean? Does that mean that you're 100% solar and you've got like battery packs that keep you running 100%? And then how do you get internet and that sort of thing? Maybe for listeners, unpack that a bit for us.
So I'm not 100% off grid. Electricity wise, I'm probably about 80 to 85% off grid. So if I expanded my capacity a little bit more, then I could function without being plugged into government provided electricity at all. But to the extent that if I have 14 hours a day without electricity, I'm fine. if I have 0 hours a day without electricity and the sun shines for 6 to 8 of those hours, I'm also fine. My problem comes in winter when we have 3 or 4 days of overcast conditions and rain. Then I'm not going to be 100% off grid. I'll be off grid for 3 days, and then I'm going to be in trouble. So that's kind of where I am. Water infrastructure wise, I do have rainwater collection, stuff like that, but I am to a degree very much dependent on the government's water provision. However, I live in Cape Town, which is an opposition-run municipality. All of the Western Cape province is. So the infrastructure here is well looked after. We do have, apart from electricity and policing, there is metro policing and then other forms of law and order that the city and the metro looks after in the province. But the national functions, they can't do much about. But everything else, I can still live. Johannesburg, our biggest city, or supposed world-class African city, as they like to call it, is presently sitting with half of that city with no water. And it has been that way for about 2 to 3 weeks now. And the reason it has no water is all the dams are full. They're blaming it on climate change. There was sufficient rain. The dams are full. The reason they can't get water to the people is because the infrastructure has been abused and dilapidated and not maintained. And they are losing about 50% of the water they provide to residents to leaks. And then the mayoral council brings out a communication where they're asking people that they need to reduce their demand, which isn't going to fix the water that's leaking out of the broken infrastructure. So they've actually succeeded, I think, in breaking a city, and they might kill it. But yeah, that's also why some of the provinces that aren't completely broken are talking about breaking away and if not completely seceding, devolving those national powers down to provincial and local level, like federalizing it.
I wanted to get your thoughts then on, I'll call it World War Z. It's funny, that movie about, with what's his face, Brad Pitt, World War Z zombies. And now we've got this special military operation, I think they call it Z in Ukraine. That's kind of, that symbolism is interesting, but just things sort of falling apart. And as you mentioned, at the national level, there's a lot of things that we can't do anything about. Things just, at the big levels, and then we got to deal with where we are locally. I always like to recite Teddy Roosevelt's quote: "Do what you can with what you got where you are." You mentioned parallel sort of structures. I've had many guests talk about we need to focus on parallel economies, parallel societies, parallel structures to get through this. You touched on, the grid aspect, going off grid, and maybe to get some more, general key themes and principles from you as what we can do going forward. You mentioned the water leaks. That's also a problem here in Mexico, probably a general problem where, through the piping, a lot of water just gets lost because of the poor infrastructure. But maybe some key principles, when it comes to, food, water, location, or relocation. One big trend seems to be leaving urban areas and going more suburban or rural.
So I think there's probably value in leaving urban areas, because densely populated, sort of highly urban places where you've got limited road infrastructure and things like that is not somewhere you want to get stuck if things get really ugly. But I'm not one of those proponents that say, you need a little cabin out in the woods, because keeping yourself alive without some form of community is a very difficult thing to do. And it's impossible to be a doomsday prepper and have a warehouse full of food that's going to keep you alive for 3 years. Joe, by the way, which you already had on, is a great person to explain the stuff, because I'm also reading his books. But something that we're doing on a practical level here is we have started what you call mutual assistance groups, but they're not called that. They're civil society organizations that you join, and they usually have a specific original purpose or feature. They're either agricultural organizations, they're community safety organizations, they're child safety or education organizations. There are many other emergency services organizations, and they're all, for the most part, voluntary. And they either require you to pay a membership fee, or they require you to just pitch in as a volunteer and just help where you can. And some of them are quite complex, and they offer everything from actual safety and security from a community policing point of view to medical response included into that, to all sorts of other things. And then you expand these community responsibilities into other areas. We're talking about education, infrastructure maintenance and expansion, whether you're talking about fixing roads, fixing water infrastructure, maintaining electrical infrastructure within your community. There are people with required skill set, specializations, tools, and whatnot to be able to do that. And suddenly you start building the small point of hardening and resilience that's not very big on its own, but it's capable of withstanding this tide of chaos and violence because it has taken stock of its resources and its skills, and it's sort of aligned its sails to the wind, and it has a compass, and it's going in the right direction. And before you know it, there's a whole bunch of other points of resilience not too far away, and you can connect these points with secure lines of communication, whether it's road or just telecommunication or whatever, and you start linking them into little island chains where you can throw the walls out further and actually secure those areas, and normal life can, to some degree, continue productive, good life within that in times of a crisis. And there was a professor of constitutional law in South Africa. His name is Koos Malan. He wrote a book called There Is No Supreme Constitution, where he actually explains that our constitution doesn't exist, because any constitution only exists for so long as sufficient number of people believe in it. And that is the unfortunate practical reality of constitutions, is you can write all sorts of pretty things in them. If people don't agree that they should exist, then it's almost like Terry Pratchett's Small Gods. The thing just stops existing altogether with a great enough number of disbelief. However, he also said that walls around your suburban house is a negotiation with the criminal. You're essentially telling someone it's okay for you to commit all sorts of acts of violence and nonsense outside of these walls. Within here is only my domain. And his whole suggestion to society is you need to throw your walls out. You need to take them further, in the sense, take back your communities first, not by building a physical wall around them, but by owning that vacuum and that space through your projected presence and your initiatives in order to maintain that safety and security bubble, so to speak. And the more people that do that as well, you start, again, like the island chains we talked about, you start linking security bubbles up, and you force the violent element out of it. What happened in South Africa, to a large part, why we are as violent as we are, apart from the fact that violence and crime is cheap, is there's a vacuum. The government safety and security infrastructure collapsed and failed, but no one stepped up to fill that vacuum. So it was filled by criminals instead. And yeah, we have one of the largest private security industries in the world, and they did step up to the plate somewhat. But a private security company can only go as far as the contract with its client allows it to go, and it gets paid to do. And if you have a whole bunch of people just paying an armed response company to drive past once every few hours, you're not filling a vacuum at all. You're just paying a fee to make yourself feel better, but you're not achieving anything. So when you're talking about parallel institutions, it's not just one thing. It's not have a vegetable garden, try and get yourself weaned off dependence from the state and things like that, but also understand that we are interdependent creatures, and that cooperating with the right people and thinking outside the box pertaining tasks that need to get done is bigger than just a single element. And no, you're not going to bug out into the prairie. Rural places are sometimes even more dangerous than cities, especially in South Africa.
Yeah, that's the same here in Mexico. And as you mentioned, we lack that moral, cultural force in that vacuum. I mean, here in Mexico, that's why these criminals come in, and the average citizen is lazy. And we need to promote, law and order and good morals and values. And it's what you just explained. That's the common denominator that I've been getting now from guests, is community and network. That approach of bugging out, it's a failure. I mean, even here in Mexico, I've had people tell me, people who work in real estate, if you go too far outside of the city here, because you where everything's congregated, you've still got the police congregated in the city, but the further you go out, the less police presence there is, and the more there are criminals. And so, I mean, what are you going to do? They can just go rob you, kill you, rape your wife or whatever out in the boondocks. And so we need to focus on we can't do nothing on our own. And as you just explained, finding these, putting together. I like how you said these security sort of bubbles, linking things up, and that's definitely, I think, the way to go. And I get people asking me. I had someone in rural Canada ask me about if they should go to Russia. And I'm like, I mean, do you speak any Russian? No. Do you know anyone in Russia? It's like, no. Well, I'm a Slav. I'm a Croatian, so I already understand like 50% Russian. Many things are very similar. So, for someone like myself, but even still, I don't know that many people, and so it might be better to stay where you are and just build these networks. And other tips, maybe physical security, financial. We don't have to go into too much detail, but here in Mexico, it's difficult legally to get a gun. There's only one gun store in the capital. The paperwork is insane to go through the paperwork. Just any other just key quick thoughts on physical security, or even financial security. A lot of people buy gold, silver, crypto. I try to say get out of fiat and buy things that you're going to need, non-perishable goods and that sort of thing.
So I'll start with the financial one. I think your advice is really good in the sense, look, gold's great. Gold comes with some problems. Gold comes that it's usually denominated in fine ounces, and one fine ounce is quite expensive, and it might be difficult for the average person to afford a full fine ounce of gold. The second problem with gold is safekeeping and transportation and that sort of stuff. The good thing about it is it doesn't spoil. It doesn't get moldy. It doesn't rot, all those wonderful things. And it's generally considered to be a valuable asset. But it's difficult to use as a medium of exchange. It's great to use as a store of value, but in the apocalypse, cigarettes might be worth more to you as a currency, to be honest, than a gold coin. And that's not talking in the absolute extreme. However, I do like crypto, not all of it. You need to kind of be very careful what you buy, and never, ever, ever put all your eggs in one basket. Don't just pick a certain asset class or a thing, but investing in yourself, investing in skills and knowledge, equipment, and non-perishable stuff is almost like a vital thing. You do need to have useful tools and the ability to use them. That is going to be able to generate its own sustainable form of income and produce that way. The second thing pertaining safety and security tips, I always start people off and say the most important thing for you to do but two most important things for you to do, and they're kind of interconnected. The first thing is develop a combative mindset. And I believe that every single reasonable person has one mission, and that's to go home safe and alive and sound to their loved ones at the end of every day. Nothing else is more important than that. A combative mindset is merely making the active decision every day that you are going to prevail over whatever life throws at you during the day, especially if it's a criminal encounter, and you will do whatever it takes, regardless of how distasteful it is, to be victorious, not just to survive, because to survive means you might end up in a wheelchair or paralyzed or something, and that's not good enough. I think not for me. Is you will prevail over your circumstances or your attackers to go home safe and sound to your family. So first thing first is develop that attitude, that understanding that my life has value. And if someone wants to take it from you, you should be fucking angry. You shouldn't be meek or apologetic or afraid. You should be furious and enraged at this person who wants to take that from you. And you need to do what you need to do to stop them from doing that. The second part is cultivate healthy situational awareness. I mean, I see it in traffic every day. People get sucked into their phones when they're sitting at a red traffic light, and then they go, oh my goodness, how did this person smash my window and steal my handbag? It happened so fast. It's like, no, it didn't happen fast at all. There were signs of what we call, they were predatory telegraphed signals from these people that you could see the pre-attack indicators if you knew what to look for. And they're not difficult things. I mean, there's you can easily find them on the internet. What is a pre-attack indicator? Be unsucked from your phone and plugged into your environment. Just know what's going on around you in a relaxed state of awareness. You can Google the Jeff Cooper color codes, the condition white, yellow, orange, and red. But we don't even need to go that far. It's just a case of understand what's going around you, who's in it, where are you going, have a thorough understanding of these things. And it takes practice because we've almost been deconditioned from being situation aware and conditioned to be easily distracted by everything from billboards to what's going on Twitter to what's playing on the radio. So with those two skills, if you can combine that with any form of good practical self-defense skill, your primary purpose obviously to avoid getting into trouble. If you can't avoid it, to then evade it. But if you can't avoid or evade it, you need to be able to fight and counter it. And obviously, depending upon what is legal and practical in your jurisdiction, understand what tools are at your disposal and become adept at using at least one of them.
Yeah, you mentioned that combative mindset. When I first came to Mexico, my home, I was not living in a gated community, and my home had been burglarized, ransacked 3 times while I was away. And I was almost at the point like I was just going to sit with the lights off in the couch all night, with a gun, waiting for them to come in the 4th time. And as you said, I mean, it's your home. I'd have no qualms killing someone in terms of self-defense if they're trying to kill me. And I always, even the Old Testament has a section that says, if a burglar comes into your home and you kill them, there's nothing, your conscience is clean. But also the situational awareness. I can't tell you how many times that's saved me. I mean, I went out for tacos last night. I didn't even take my phone, and I'm just sitting there, waiting for the tacos, but just always looking around. And I think just the fact, if someone is watching you, just the fact that they see you situationally aware, they're like, I'm probably not going to go for that person. And so, that's a key thing. And, any thought on electronics, cyber, or communications security? I like a de-Googled phone, using VPNs, basic stuff like that. Just anything that stands out in your mind when it comes to electronic comms.
So there's a few things, but yeah, just on your previous note, you're absolutely 100% correct. Criminals aren't stupid. They do this stuff for a living. They can pick up on your body language, whether or not you're going to be an easy target or not. And if you don't look like lunch, you might not get eaten. So yeah, it's very important, body language. Cybersecurity is a weak point of mine, or electronic security rather, but I do use a VPN as a matter of habit. I actually use where is this thing of mine? ExpressVPN. Sorry, it's probably not the best one out there. I believe Nord is quite good as well, but it's the one that I do use. I also try to avoid using Google for anything if I can. I actually prefer email addresses where the server is semi under my direct control. At least I know the guy who owns the server personally. I try to avoid WhatsApp as much as possible as far as instant messaging goes. There are better options. And there's quite a few secure premium options. I think the one that I actually have on my phone, but I don't have enough people who want to use it with me, which depresses me, is something called Threema. It's THRWEMA. Yeah. You have to actually pay to use it, but it's pretty secure and fairly serious OPSEC people make use of it, so I'm happy with it. But it's basic things like that is you are a product for your social media company, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or whomever. That's why it's a free to use thing. They do harvest your data. It always helps being careful with it. I did try Tor browser, by the way, for a while. It's good, but it's hard to use for everyday stuff. But I found that Brave browser has been pretty good to me. It's non-Google. Well, until some scandal comes out like there was with DuckDuckGo, where they actually do harvest your data. But yeah, I'm going to ask you for advice on this one. I think you know a lot more than I do. What do you usually advise people to do?
I mean, actually, what you mentioned was similar. For example, Google, Geopolitics and Empire is blacklisted on Google. If you type in Geopolitics and Empire, my website podcast doesn't come up on the Google search engine. But if you use all the alternatives, everything pops up. And Tor, I don't trust. I've interviewed cypherpunk Paul Rosenberg, who himself said that, Signal was created by the U.S. government. Tor was created by the U.S. government. And so he says a lot of the exit nodes, are on Tor are like run by the FBI or whatever, by the state, and they configure stuff. And it's really slow. So, I don't even, 2 years ago, I uninstalled WhatsApp. And imagine the world that we live in, where a number of my, fair weather friends, normie friends, I've lost touch with them just for the fact that I don't have WhatsApp. And it's like, I don't care. I mean, if that's the level of the relationship, just because I don't have WhatsApp, you don't contact me anymore, then those are people that I don't need, right? You don't want to have those kind of people in your life. And as you said, WhatsApp, CIA, NSA, governments have access to it. So I purchased Threema, even for my wife, and she stopped using it. So it's like really hard to get people to use these alternatives. I like Telegram and other stuff, but VPN. I had to go through 3 VPNs. I was living in Kazakhstan some years ago, and they kept blocking the VPNs. Even my private emails was blocked in Kazakhstan and Russia. And so, you got to find all these tools. I like to look for the more obscure sorts of tools. And I think you touched on most of those points. And just maybe to bring it back to Africa, again, you sort of outlined a lot of these problems, yet you maintain optimism. What would be sort of your summary again of the situation in South Africa?
So what we're having at the moment, in summary, is we're having a sort of national level infrastructure collapse where only 30% of our rail infrastructure is still working. Most of our road infrastructure is busy eroding quickly. We're on the brink of a grid collapse of our national electricity grid. And we've had perpetual rolling blackouts for almost 2 straight months. And our biggest metropolitan is running out of water or cannot provide water to half of its residents. So from an infrastructure point of view, it's a complete disaster. From a political point of view, we're having our governing party, the African National Congress, is set to probably lose the next general election, and they are busy fracturing internally into different factions, and that faction fight is becoming very violent. Plus, they are directly integrated into our criminal underworld, our organized crime networks with all the various mafias, from taxi mafia, construction mafia, the gangs, the illegal miners, all these sorts of things. So we have a gangster state from a political point of view. Our national safety and security situation is disastrous. We're one of the most violent countries in the world. I think the 6th highest homicide rate internationally, last time I checked. And there was a third, and our economy is completely wrecked. However, people haven't sat back and done nothing. There's been a huge amount of organization in building parallel, resilient economic, social, security, and infrastructure sort of projects and structures. And in some places, it's more evident than others. There are areas of the country that will not survive or that will never recover. But if you go back to 1910, when South Africa was artificially created as the Union of South Africa, we're not really a nation state. We are a geographic area with the central government, with 11 tribes and 11 different languages, all sort of semi-cohabitating in relative peace with each other. But none of us really identify with this thing called the national identity. And I think we're on the brink of that thing becoming dying at its end, and I'm not quite sure what it will be replaced with, but at least we're not back where we were 20 years ago, where everyone is still believing in this nonsense.
It's going to be replaced by the supranational African Union and then world government. I was talking about this yesterday. Secretary of State U.S. Blinken and my president AMLO of Mexico, they were literally, I can't believe it, literally calling for North American Union. Literally, they're saying integrating Canada, USA, and Mexico, just like the EU. And I know the African Union already exists. They're trying to make a common currency for one giant block of Africa and whip out those African Union passports. So I think you laid it out correctly. The national thing isn't working, and I think they're trying to bring us into these regional unions. Time will tell. Any final thought for us?
So only two of them. The first one is thank goodness Africa is an inefficient, broken, corrupt place. I love it because any form of supranational union is doomed to complete failure. So that's a good thing. And on the other side, maybe these guys are just really big fans of the Aliens franchise and they want to create the United Americas for the United States Colonial Space Marine Corps or whatever it's called. They already have Space Force, but they need the rest of North and South America in under the same flag for it to work. So, maybe they just want to do that. I don't know, but
maybe they are actually aliens, or maybe they're reptiles, like Thierry Baudet, my recent guest, said. I mean, I took that as a joke, but anyways, we're joking. I don't really believe in literal shape-shifting reptiles, but we're the best. I'll include all of your links in the description, but just where are the best places to find you on the internet, and if you've got any projects you want to mention.
So you can probably find me on my Twitter account most regularly. I haven't written a good article in a while. I've been a bit swamped with good projects that I can't quite tell you about yet. Not because they're illegal, but because there's a little bit of confidentiality with the supplier. But if you would like to have me on again, I'll gladly talk to you about it. That might be quite a good thing. Otherwise, keep an eye on my website, paratus.info. It's paratus.info. That's where everything is kind of centrally linked. And I'll actually just give you a proper final thought, not a joke final thought. I think what we've noticed the past 2 to 3 years is that apathy among citizens is a far greater threat for freedom, democracy, all these individual liberty, all these things we hold dear than tyrannical governments ever can be. But active citizens, people who believe in individual freedom, liberty, the good things in life, but that's worth fighting for, standing together and actually actively trying to make a difference holds great power. And we mustn't underestimate that power. And I think banding together with people that feel the same way as we do and going in the right direction is the answer to this dystopia, because our elected officials are not going to drive the ship anywhere other than into icebergs forever. And I fear that we are down a path that's going to be quite awful for a while, but we're not just passengers on that ride.
And that's exactly what my recent guest, Ralph Schollhammer, Austrian academic and geopolitical consultant, said the same thing. He said that what's the bigger danger are the people from below, versus the globalists, is our spiritual emptiness, our apathy. As you said, that's the biggest danger. And I've been sort of banging on about that for 10 plus years as a professor and teacher of history, economics, and politics, trying to tell the students, like, wake up, learn history. Liberty begins with you, as it says right behind me. And people just want their Netflix and McDonald's, and they don't care about anything else. They love the metaverse, but we got to change that. And you're welcome back anytime. I love your stuff. And thank you for being on Geopolitics and Empire.
Thank you for having me. It's been awesome.
I hope you enjoyed this Geopolitics and Empire podcast. The website is geopoliticsandempire.com, and I encourage you to sign up for the free email list that goes out with each podcast and every weekend with a collection of news headlines. The newsletter and website are our last lines of defense. We're being censored and deplatformed. It's nearly impossible to find Geopolitics and Empire on the Google search engine. We've been blacklisted. YouTube frequently takes down our videos with strikes. Facebook restricts our page. Reddit and Twitter take down posts. And after the Associated Press mentioned Geopolitics and Empire in a 2021 article co-written with NATO, our Patreon account was terminated. Vimeo also terminated our Pro account. The best free way to help Geopolitics and Empire is to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or elsewhere and subscribe to all of our media channels. You can find the video broadcast now on 5 platforms: Odyssey, Rockfin, Rumble, BitChute, and Brighteon. You can find the audio broadcast on the podcast ecosystem: SoundCloud, Apple, Spotify, and so on. My current favorite social media channels are Twitter and Telegram, but you can also find us on Gab, MeWe, Minds, Float, VK, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Finally, Geopolitics and Empire is in dire need of funding to continue. You can leave a donation, purchase a consultation with the host, or become a member to receive additional benefits. We also produce a weekly broadcast called Dissident Thinker for members and Rockfin subscribers only. We will continue to fight the good fight come hell or high water. Thank you for listening.